Welcome back to this series of conversations around 5G orchestration. Terry Sweeney here with Light Reading, and joining me now is Glen McGowan, Director of Product Management from Dell. Glen, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Why is orchestration, and more specifically, bare metal orchestration, so important for cloud service providers?
It's a very daunting environment. You have many different environments that you're probably deploying the infrastructure into. There's all sorts of issues associated with getting that infrastructure out there, getting it bootstrapped, getting it provisioned. Each of the telco environments themselves are bespoke in one way or the other. So they all have different challenges that they're trying to address. The bigger problem is that the tooling that they have on the truck today is, primarily focused on the top-down approach, which is, I want to be able to orchestrate a workload into an environment, whether it be a VNF or a CNF or something of that nature. But often what gets overlooked is, the bottoms-up approach, right? I think if we look at the industry as a whole, there's just been this, the lack of reality, right? Where people assume that a building starts with the first floor, when in reality, there's a whole basement there where all of your mechanics and, your plumbing and things like that exist. And all of that stuff has to be bootstrapped. It has to be staged in order for the building itself to function. And so when we look at, the telco infrastructure, it's just that, something's got to be able to bootstrap the VMware environment. Something has to bootstrap the Red Hat environments and Wind River and all of those things, right? And then something has to, lifecycle manage that. There's continuous, dynamic, events that are taking place in the infrastructure. And, we've got to be able to, provide, the capabilities to support that, whether it be, a vulnerability patch or just simple telemetry and monitoring of that physical infrastructure. But more realistically is, what we see as maybe the dynamic environment that will play out, where you have, dynamic load conditions that may exist from a network perspective that would require, just-in-time horizontal scale out, or perhaps reprovisioning of a node, or, those sorts of things that, aren't taken into account when we have that top-down approach. So we're not trying to go up the stack. We're looking at, our specific layer and saying, okay, what can we do to make this better? And it really becomes a question of, how do we make it more programmable? How do we make it more composable? And then how do we integrate with those upper layers so that there's, a continuous, disaggregation all the way down to the bare metal. And so that's really what we're trying to address here is okay. Close that gap.
So let's dig in there a little bit. Tell us a bit more about Dell's solution here. What is Bare Metal Orchestrator?
Bare Metal Orchestrator is a platform that we provide to the telco environment that allows them to essentially run their physical infrastructure as a bare metal service. So it's software that runs in their premise. It's integrated horizontally and vertically with their BSS OSS environments. And it provides that, programmable, composable capability at a distributed scale. So, if you look at what's out there today in terms of the solutions for managing these types of environments, they're not built for scale. They're built for, data center environments and things like that. When we try to scale them, some of them scale and they may successfully scale at, some of the smaller sizes, right? But, as they scale into the tens of thousands of sites and hundreds of thousands of devices under management, that's where things get very tricky. And so bare metal orchestration starts with that, that problem statement first, which is scale. When we developed BMO, we said, okay, we've got to address scale first. So we had to develop a software product that allowed us to do tens of thousands of sites. The next piece was heterogeneity, which is, probably interesting for Dell, which is, we can't just come out with a product that only supports Dell hardware. The telcos themselves, have at least a dual vendor strategy, and they don't do that for necessarily control or any nefarious reasons. They have, supply chain continuity and things like that they have to work through. So it's a necessity for us to be heterogeneous in our applications. So if you take those two tenets, right? scale and heterogeneity, those were really the basis for what we developed BMO. And then everything else after that, is really just table stakes. You've got to be able to federate that environment. Those tens of thousands of sites, got to provide a single pane of glass, a common operational model, a common northbound API to be able to provide that programmability and composability. And then, of course, there's the composability aspect. We've got to be able to take the compute, the network, the storage, and now the acceleration, and then allow the telcos to compose those into the specific configurations that are necessary throughout their network. And it's not a single cookie cutter at each site. They could have one type of configuration deployment at an edge location, or a different one in the data center or the core. And it's us providing sort of the composability to allow them to do that. And then it's about lifecycle management of the physical infrastructure. So providing telemetry and performance capacity management, reporting, logging, all of those things that are necessary for managing that infrastructure. So when you bring all of those together, that's what BMO is. We saw that there was a very big gap in the market as we start to advocate for telco. We said, look, how can we make this better, right? And we realized that we, as a hardware vendor, weren't really stepping up to the challenge, right? And so we had to step up to the challenge, and we made some decisions that we thought were fairly considerate, from a telco perspective. So.
Well, those are all important features, and I think what we can agree is a massively complex environment. What specific benefits can carriers expect to gain from using Bare Metal Orchestrator?
It's operational efficiency, I think, number one, right? So operational efficiency in that, if you look at how long it takes to deploy a site, where I grew up, one of the top 2 telco providers in the world, it took us anywhere from 6 to 8 months to, deploy a site, to get it up and running. So, we've demonstrated, at least in our case, that we can reduce that by, 90 something percent, right? Once we get, our infrastructure in place that allows us to discover and inventory and bootstrap and those sorts of things. So we can significantly reduce the OpEx associated with that. We can reduce, truck rolls. We can, reduce the potential downtimes that are associated with, having this highly skilled workforce. They are a highly skilled workforce, go out and deploy these environments, but they do make mistakes from time to time, right? And automating some of that stuff, prevents those mistakes that could, elongate the downtimes and things like that you would typically see in a production environment. But then when you do have those downtimes, automation further enhances your ability to recover from those types of things. So for us, it's how do we reduce operational costs, right? And that's our primary goal for BMO.
Thanks. Talk a bit about how Bare Metal Orchestrator differs from competitive products, say from cloud platform vendors like Red Hat, VMware, Wind River. What are some differentiators from Dell's perspective?
Yeah, so we're towing a fine line, right? We are the hardware vendor. We want to make that physical infrastructure more consumable, more programmable. But as I said before, the game to date has been a top-down approach. It's been, those vendors, and those vendors to us are partners, right? We've been partnering with them for a very long time, and they're still partners for us. But the equations that they're looking to solve are more of pure abstraction of the physical infrastructure. And as we look at 5G, we see that those workloads, the CNFs and the VNFs that get deployed in those environments have to have a more intimate relationship with the physical infrastructure. So being able to provide just-in-time, configuration of the physical assets for, dynamic load conditions and horizontal scale out and things like that, right? Where those were sort of blind spots for them. So we're working with them and saying, hey, look, let us, help you better, deploy your environments and be able to manage those workloads so that, when it becomes time to do those hard things, you have an integration with a system that allows you to do those things. You can look at Red Hat and the work that they've done with Ironic. Ironic is a great tool, but Ironic was developed for deploying, OpenStack environments, right? But if we look at that the heterogeneous environment that the telcos have, a tool like Ironic doesn't necessarily work. It's great for bootstrapping Red Hat, but what if, we want to deploy Red Hat today and then we want to deploy VMware tomorrow or deploy Ren River or whatever? Ironic doesn't really play well for that, right? So I wouldn't say that we're competing with Red Hat. We're making the physical infrastructure more programmable for them. We're making that environment, we're reducing the friction that's necessary for, keeping up with the pace of innovation for the telco customer. So, we're advocating for the telco customer and saying, hey, there's a gap between when your hardware gets to the site and when you push a workload. Let's bring that together. And that's where we partner with Red Hat and VMware and those stacks to do that.
Glenn, close us out by speaking to Dell's vision for the future of Bare Metal Orchestrator. What do you see as you look out at the horizon?
I see a lot of interest from folks that have been trying to solve this problem for a very long time. We certainly feel like we've struck a nerve. This has been something that has needed to be done for a long time, but there wasn't really anybody in the market that's doing this. And so it was very hard for us to come in and say, okay, look, let's build a business case for doing this when there's no contemporary examples ahead of us that have demonstrated success in that. But now that we're starting to demonstrate and, implement and actually deliver value, we're starting to see, competitors emerge. We're starting to see people say, oh, well, we've got to really take that into account now. So I see that what we're doing with BMO actually becomes a catalyst for, bridging that gap between the physical infrastructure and how we take that physical infrastructure and build that more intimate relationship with the workloads themselves. So I think, I'm not saying we're disrupting, but if that means that we're sort of the first mover here that's doing that, maybe we are disrupting, right? So I think we'll see further disruption in that space, and that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to learning how we can take BMO and enhance it and leverage it, and continue to advocate for the telco to address these needs.
Well, I appreciate the perspective on bare metal orchestration. Glenn, thanks for doing this today.
Thank you. This was great. I enjoy these conversations.
We've been talking with Glen McGowan from Dell. This has been Terry Sweeney with Light Reading. Thanks for joining us for this series of conversations on 5G orchestration. We'll see you next time.